Shipyard Briefing, Earthquake Considerations. My name is Daniel Vallis and welcome to our channel. Praise the Lord, a lot has been going on here at Brook Cherith with a lot of planning, preparing for the Rapture Library and the medical clinic. All the ministries that the Lord has been preparing in light of the prophetic time that He has shown us, which also shows us the opportunity for souls that will be tender here at this incredible prophetic hour. And as we are commanded to redeem the time and occupy till He comes, that is hedged in context that we understand the time, that we search out the time, that we watch the time, that we also take heed to ourselves. We look at the time, but we also understand what is coming. And that's what the Apostle Paul warned about. We will see the day approaching, the day of the tribulation start. They started the day of indignation, the day of the Lord. We will see that coming, which means we will have an understanding of what is about to come onto the world. And as Christians, understanding prophecy, that should stir in our hearts for the lost souls, for the ministry opportunities that will be available, and to take advantage of that as much as possible while we are still here, redeeming the time, knowing what is coming. Indeed, as we see the day approaching, we should be provoking one another unto love and unto good works, hedged by our understanding of prophecy. And so in this briefing today, we're just going to focus on a singular subject. There's so much we could talk about, particularly with what the Lord's doing here at Brook Cherith. But we're going to focus on just a very narrow aspect in this briefing. Lord willing, we'll have some other briefings where we'll talk more about other progress and other information that is happening here at Brook Cherith too. And we're also awaiting more information as well too. But we're going to park on one subject in this video that colors the preparations and the understanding of the prophetic time, also what is coming, and hopefully this will help you also see the day approaching more of what is going to be happening to the world. The more that we have a clear understanding of prophecy, what the Bible says is going to happen, the more that should stir in us to have a tender heart for those who will be here during that time. And so as I've been going forward just in the planning, preparation, and the getting so much ready here in the past few weeks, it's been amazing how time has flown by, but a lot of considerations have come together in the logistics of the planning for meeting this ministry opportunity. And one of the biggest ones is understanding this concept that the Bible warns us that there will be a major earthquake, and that colors our preparations and also how we approach the understanding of the day that we do see approaching. As we are looking at the opportunities, we have to take into mind what is going to be happening here on the earth in the situations and scenario, and then take that into consideration with the planning of how to best be resilient during that with any ministry resources or whatever that we leave behind. How can we be the most resilient and have the most enduring ministry opportunity, leave a light burning the longest once those events go into motion as that day does finally arrive? And so if you've been with us recently, you know we are preparing the Brook Cherith Medical Mission Center, which will encapsulate a Rapture Library, presenting a lot of prophetic information, giving them really a crash course on what is unfolding right there at that dark hour, but then also medical missions that are addressing the physical needs as well too. And we've already looked at some of the models of how could we approach this. The Lord has shown us the opportunity. He's shown us how we have rehearsed so much with the Brook Cherith Clinic over the past few years already. He's brought together a whole mesh of information and experience that we have literally rehearsed. And so as He's showing us a broader opportunity with this larger field here and this expanding on the experience, it's also keeping in context of how do we enlarge this, but also make it very durable, very resilient during what is about to come. Mainly because we want the ministry light to be shining as long as possible. And so recently, as we've been looking at enclosed trailers as one mode to have the medical clinic ready to be deployed and instantly available, that was one option that we looked at. But the Lord really brought up and emphasized whatever preparations you do go forward in after this rehearsal, it must be very resilient to earthquakes, because you do know what is coming. As soon as on the very first day, you should expect these events that are described in the Bible, which revolve around even sudden destruction and earthquakes. 1 Thessalonians 5:2-3, for yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord, the tribulation day, the day of indignation, so cometh as a thief in the night. It's going to come unannounced, with a degree of ambiguity. That's how it's coming. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Okay, this is a subject we've been looking at prophetically. We've heard a lot of warning, particularly from February 22 with the invasion of Ukraine and the different speeches made at the UN Security Council. But the prophetic understanding tells us that sudden destruction is coming. But also look in verse 2, the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night too. So there's a double emphasis that what is coming is going to happen very suddenly. And it's just not a localized destruction. It's apparently a very widespread, worldwide type of destruction, hitting many different areas so that the world can see the sudden destruction is coming. All the different actors who are saying peace and safety across the world, the sudden destruction is going to impact a wide variety of people. And that's why the world will know, yes, this is definitely the fulfillment of that prophecy that Paul talked about. But the tribulation day is going to come as a thief in the night. And sudden destruction, that's how it's described. It's all going to be very suddenly, but it's also going to be very sudden destruction as well. And of course, this seems to best fit our modern understanding of a nuclear war, what we may call World War III. It may or may not use actual nuclear weapons. It may use electromagnetic weapons disguised under the guise of nuclear weapons, how they're called. But we know there's all sorts of different technologies out there, but just for our general understanding, the average person would say, yes, it looks like a nuclear war is what is described with the start of the tribulation. The sudden destruction that impacts a wide variety of people. It's coming suddenly, and it's going to come like a thief, just out of the blue, unannounced, with a degree of ambiguity. But the Apostle Paul warns us that you will hear a forewarning when they start talking about peace and safety. That is a big clue of what is coming. We don't know exactly how long after that. We are looking at that with the 1-year anniversary coming up in February 2023, but also understanding it can go into March and even April after that as well, particularly if you look at a 1-year anniversary on the Jewish calendar, that can go into March as well. But all we know is that would be a time of expectation. March, April, maybe even at the beginning of May. And that coincides with the celestial clock that we looked at in our last video too. All we know is, the warning is when you hear them say this is what is coming. A sudden destruction, and a very widespread apparent sudden destruction that is coming with a degree of ambiguity. And we've talked about this over the past year too, just this whole concept that the world seems to be preparing and preconditioning the world on a scripted understanding of what is coming. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. Everything right now is scripted with what the world leaders are doing and really seem to be making a situation worse on the geopolitical level. A worldwide deception will require a coordinated betrayal. And that is what we see, certainly in the world news. You don't need me to tell you that there's a lot of agitation being built around the subject of potential nuclear war, potential nuclear strikes, World War III. The world is being primed for this right now. That is an expectation, even the average person. And there's even polls going out in the news right now where a lot of people in different countries are saying, yes, they fully expect that the events that are in play right now will lead to World War III, which is, with our best understanding, people are expecting a sudden destruction that seems to match nuclear war. So we certainly see that prophetic time is short. Revelation 6:3 tells us, and when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, come and see. And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. And so this also goes with the understanding of Thessalonians that they will be talking about peace and safety, not because they have arrived at peace and safety, but because that is what is at peril. That's why they're talking about it. We're about to lose peace and security, peace and safety. We're about to lose it. And then the Apostle Paul says that's what happens. Sudden destruction comes, which of course destroys peace and any sense of security. And that's what Revelation tells us at the beginning of the tribulation with the 4 horsemen. That's what happens. Peace is taken from the world with this World War III event described by the red horse of war. And what happens? They should kill one another. It's apparently a World War III where different nations are fighting against each other, killing each other, which again in our understanding at this modern time would involve nuclear weapons, a sudden destruction. But then further down, verse 12, and I beheld when he had opened the 6th seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake. And the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Okay, so we already know World War III is coming. A nuclear type event is coming. Very widespread World War III. But then Revelation even plainly tells us there will be a great earthquake. It's going to be so great that every mountain and every island will be moved out of their places. They're all going to be shifted. So again, this is a widespread sudden destruction that is coming upon the world. And again, this is a subject we've talked about before in some of our time videos, but when you read the book of Revelation with its looping structure, and particularly how a lot of the verses start with the word and this will happen, and this will happen, and this will happen, there is a very strong implication that there's going to be a lot of overlap between the events that are described, and particularly a looping overlap as well too. So when you see between the first and second seal and then the sixth seal, we need to keep in mind that it appears that there is an overlap where all these type of events are appearing and happening concurrently. The start of World War III with this great earthquake, and even the events that are happening in the heavens, but every mountain and island moved out of their places here at the start of the tribulation. And it's going to be so widespread, particularly with the ongoing World War III, that it's all going to kill a quarter of the world's population. Apparently here right at the beginning of the tribulation. And then the fallout from that with the ripple effects. But we also know Revelation 11:7 and 17:8 tells us that the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against the two witnesses, shall overcome them and kill them. Revelation is very clear that the beast that is coming, the Antichrist, he's coming out of the bottomless pit. He's not coming from Martha's Vineyard. He's not coming from the White House. He's not coming from Kenya or some other place. He's coming out of the bottomless pit. And Revelation emphasizes this twice so that you get it. Which also, again, hedges our understanding because we know the bottomless pit is not open till one of the trumpets. And yet, Revelation emphasizes that the Antichrist is coming out of the bottomless pit. So again, that's one of those things that shows us that there's going to be a lot of overlap, a lot of these events happening concurrently, almost as though, like again, the Apostle John described, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. It's almost as though he blurts it all out. All this is happening. So yes, we need to have an understanding that between Revelation chapter 6 and Revelation 9:11, which talks about the bottomless pit being opened, it very strongly looks and plainly says that all those events will be happening almost at the same time. Which tells us that whatever is opening up the bottomless pit was probably related to also that great earthquake that is going on at the same time. That is also probably related to the World War III going on at the same time too. They all appear to be going together. And so, of course, this colors our understanding of if we're going to have some type of ministry opportunity that is going to be operating during these first hours of the tribulation and hopefully in the days after that, it needs to be able to endure some pretty rough things that are going on here on the earth. A great earthquake that moves every mountain and every island, with the bottomless pit being opened. And of course, we don't know where that is. We don't know if it's Yellowstone or some other place. But apparently, there's going to be a massive volcano opening up in the ground somewhere with the accompanying earthquakes. Maybe caused by the earthquakes, we don't know. But there's going to be a lot of geological events on top of World War III. The nations killing each other, and nuclear war. So we have to keep all that in mind with whatever planning we consider how to be best used and leave a light shining bright during this time. And this is important because nuclear detonations can trigger earthquakes and distant earthquakes. This is well known. You can pause the video here and read some of this, but it's very well understood nuclear bomb testing has doubled the earthquake rate in the world. And there is a direct cause and effect to testing of nuclear devices with the increase in earthquakes. And even Dr. Walt Brown, a National Science Foundation Fellow and Chief of Science and Technology Studies at the Air War College, he said the drastic case of a nuclear explosion on a large plateau could produce worldwide earthquakes. This is well known that this could happen. If there is a nuclear exchange, it will result in some major worldwide earthquakes. You look at two of the major nuclear tests that America did. Nevada, June 19, 1992, right before some of the nuclear moratoriums went into effect. The U.S. conducted an underground nuclear bomb test named Victoria with another test 4 days later. 22 hours later, a 5.6 earthquake struck less than 20 miles from that test site. 3 days later, a series of heavy earthquakes as high as 7.6 on the Richter scale rocked the Mojave Desert 176 miles to the south. And that's just shortly after 2 nuclear tests. Also in Alaska, the largest underground test ever conducted by the United States. A 5 megaton nuclear device detonated underground in Alaska registered 7.0 Richter scale, 1,000 aftershocks. Some as strong as 4.0 continued for 30 days after that nuclear test. Even at the time, it was strongly objected to over fears that the underground explosion could serve as the first domino of the row of dominoes leading to a major earthquake. See, the scientists understand nuclear detonations can trigger earthquakes. They know this. This is well known, even demonstrated by the United States' own nuclear tests. But it's also known that earthquakes and nukes can trigger volcanoes too. The shock waves of a nuclear explosion create the conditions of an eruption. And you may remember back in February 2013, there were concerns raised that North Korea's nuclear test might trigger an eruption of a nearby dormant volcano. That's what they were worried about. Not that it's necessarily going to create an earthquake, which it would, but they were worried that this could spark off the volcano. We don't want a volcano. Japanese scientists have connected previous eruptions with major subterranean stresses associated with earthquakes. So earthquakes and nukes can trigger volcanoes. We have to keep this in mind with what the Bible tells us about the bottomless pit being opened, right in context of other events that appear to involve what we would call nuclear weapons as well. Earthquakes can trigger distant, multiple earthquakes. The Denali Fault earthquake in 2002, magnitude 7.9 earthquake, the strongest ever recorded in the interior of Alaska, was comparable in size and type to the quake that devastated San Francisco in 1906. It unleashed thousands of landslides. This earthquake itself may have been triggered by a 6.7 trembler on the same fault 10 days earlier. The Denali quake resulted in water sloshing throughout the contiguous United States, back and forth in lakes, bayous, ponds, and pools. Sites lasted as long as half an hour, resulting in broken moorings in Lake Pontchartrain, Louisiana, from an earthquake in Alaska. And so this is something you have to keep in mind because of the hydraulic nature in the world and the plates. If an earthquake is triggered in one area hydraulically, it can trigger earthquakes in far distant areas. So you can start to get an idea of how multiple nuclear strikes, even often remote areas, can trigger worldwide strikes by the spread effect, the hydrological effect. This same earthquake also triggered more than 200 small earthquakes in Yellowstone and drastically changed the behavior of some of Yellowstone's geysers and hot springs. Particularly also when you consider the increase in fracking used in oil extraction. Fracking increases the hydraulic nature of the ground and also the propensity toward earthquakes. So a lot of what's been going on over the past few years and decades has actually increased the ability for earthquakes to travel hydraulically in America particularly. Why do nuclear detonations trigger quakes? The shock waves release the fault, setting it in motion. The nuclear shockwave has not caused the earthquake. It is merely releasing existing pent-up tension already in the ground by putting enough pressure on the fault line to contribute enough stress, triggering the quake through a process called impoundment. This effect in slow motion is often seen and expected when filling new reservoirs or new dam lakes, such as the one in China in 2008 that triggered a 7.9 earthquake. Nuclear detonations near fault lines will directly affect the fault line. Because of this, most tests are done away from seismic areas unless deliberate to observe the seismic activity. In 1967, the 1 megaton faultless test failed because of the large degree of faulting that resulted in the area around the test. The land was then unsafe for multi-megaton nuclear tests, so they end up moving the test to Antigua, Alaska, which of course cause more problems. When detonated in fault zones, they do trigger earthquakes. This is well known. It doesn't cause the earthquake, but it releases the built-up stress that's already in the ground through a process called impoundment. And so again, when we take it into consideration what the Bible tells us will be happening, what is going on, even the descriptions of it, we can start to put together that it appears there is going to be a chain reaction of events. Starting with nuclear warfare, an exchange of nuclear type weaponry where the nations turn against each other, where they're starting to kill each other, that triggers volcanoes. Active volcanoes and dormant volcanoes. And this gets really worrisome once you start seeing how many dormant volcanoes are in so many areas that people living there don't even realize there's a dormant volcano right there. When you consider a nuclear war is most likely going to trigger a lot of those dormant volcanoes through earthquakes, that really colors our understanding of what is about to hit the fan. because earthquakes will definitely be triggered at the same time too. All of this will also lead to mega tsunamis. The significant port targeting, which are going to be targeted during war. They're going to be targeting major earthquake-prone areas, major ports. Just tactically with war, they're going to be targeting that, but there's also major volcanoes in a lot of those areas. Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, and such places like that. That's also going to trigger earthquakes, underwater earthquakes as well, underwater landslides. You're going to see massive tsunamis swamping large volumes of shipping and devastating seaboards and coastal cities. And all this domino effect apparently is going into effect at the beginning of the tribulation. And like Christ even says, there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars and upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity. With perplexity. They will not understand what's going on. It doesn't make sense. Everything is hitting the fan all at once. The sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Even here in this modern time with so many movies that depict the end of the world, our minds fail to fully grasp what is coming on the world. And the more that we study prophecy and we take into mind these considerations, that should sober us to have a heart that is tender toward them and to provide them with the best information and resources that can help them in this scenario context. Understanding that they're going to be looking at it and they're still going to have perplexity. They are still going to be trying to understand what is going on, and they will be looking at it. It's going to be that confusing and that overwhelming. It's hard enough for us now. We can't even see it, but we have a vague idea of everything that's going to be hitting the fan. And that should sober us to action, to see an incredible opportunity in the midst of perplexity, when people are looking for answers. Jesus Christ even tells us they're going to be looking for answers. Are we thinking of ministry opportunities, ministry ways that we can provide answers right when they have so many questions? A time of great perplexity. This is what our Lord has been showing us here through the book Cherith. He's not just showing us the day approaching, but He's showing us how we can answer their questions and how we can reach so many hearts that will be tender during that incredible time. So when we review the reasons to expect a major earthquake at the start of tribulation, widespread sun destruction is coming in a surprise manner. Apparently matches nuclear type war, might be electromagnetic weapons, but which expectedly should trigger a great earthquake. Just on that passage alone, a sun destruction, that should instantly call to mind the only real frame of reference that we have with sun destruction, that is some type of nuclear detonation, which we then follow through, would result in a major worldwide earthquake too, just based on the science. A nuclear exchange of World War III starting should trigger a great earthquake just by itself. And of course then the Bible tells us with the second seal that the red horse of war takes peace from the earth. The four horsemen are essentially World War III, nuclear war, everything all coming at once, and then the fallout effects of it, the ripple effects, the people dying off from everything falling apart. The sixth seal, we know, is clearly a worldwide great earthquake, obviously over a magnitude 8. Obviously on a very high scale that moves every mountain, every island. The world has not seen that type of destruction worldwide in the modern era. And of course, the fifth trumpet also tells us the beast comes out of the bottomless pit, which harkens back to the beginning events with the first seal and second seal and similar events to the sixth seal great earthquake. When you compare the two with the bottomless pit being open, that also is described as darkening the sun and air as well too, which is what is described with the great earthquake. So there's a lot of similarities. We can see how there appears to be overlap between all these events happening at the same time. World War III, a great earthquake, and the bottomless pit all being opened at the same time. Right at the beginning of the day of the Lord, the day of indignation, which we commonly know as the start of the tribulation. We should expect there to be a great earthquake. And so for our ministry considerations, particularly here from an American perspective, when we look at America, and if you're in another country, you can easily find seismic maps for your area. So when there is a worldwide earthquake, certain areas, just from our understanding, are going to feel it far worse than others because we already know that there's a great amount of faulting in that area, greater amounts of stress already built up in that area that will be released through the impoundment of the nuclear detonations. And again, earthquakes can travel quite a distance and cause other ones to happen at quite a distance too hydraulically. And so this brings up different ministry considerations, different planning of if we're going to leave a light burning after we are gone, after the rapture, at the start of the tribulation, how can we plan and make the logistics so that that ministry will be most resilient for that area? Would it be better to be in another area? Would it be better to allocate resources to where they will be more resilient? We look at all this and examine where is the Lord working also? Where does He seem to be directing our attention to? And so when we look in America, we could see obviously the West Coast has a lot of known seismic activity with the earthquakes and dormant volcanoes going up and down the coast, that whole area there, and then Yellowstone. So most people know that once the tribulation starts, there's going to be a lot of volcanic activity over there on the West Coast. On top of all the earthquake activity too. Yellowstone will most certainly be going off. Again, we don't know if that's the bottomless pit, but we do know it does have some history of being a very large volcano, and it most certainly will go off. And even the world with the movie 2012 has this understanding, the average understanding of most people too, that Yellowstone is a volcano and it probably will go off again one day. So if conditions are right for that, then that should be expected. But this map also starts to show people are understanding man-made earthquakes come into the equation too, with fracking, with oil and gas explorations, because fracking causes man-made earthquakes. And then on top of that, it can magnify natural earthquakes to travel through those areas too. And so this map also kind of shows some areas that they know are hotspots for man-made earthquakes via fracking as well too. So again, we're in central Alabama, which means we are close to the New Madrid fault line. So for us, for our consideration, if a magnitude 8 earthquake goes off that is triggering and moving every mountain, every island out of their place, shaking them all up a bit worldwide, that's going to magnify what is already here in this general region. And so then we start to examine how bad could it get? What historic comparisons can we make and also derive understanding from going forward? And how can we mitigate those effects to be the most resilient during conditions that may exist in this area, known historically for major earthquakes that will be approaching the scale of what the Bible seems to suggest. And so when we zoom in a little bit and just look at the New Madrid earthquakes, this fault line, we know very historically that major earthquakes have happened in this area 1811 through 1812. These were some major earthquakes, 7.7 on the Richter scale, 7.0, 7.5, and 7.7. These historic events were not just one singular earthquake. It was 4 major earthquakes back to back, separated by days. And what makes them so significant is they had a widespread impact, a very large impact on the eastern side of America here. Some of the shaking was felt even in Washington, D.C. at the time. And so again, we're in central Alabama, not about an hour above Montgomery. So we can see that even right here, historically, we will have a strong earthquake here. We will feel it. And again, historically, these are 7.7 and 7.5 earthquakes. So these are very major earthquakes. So this gives us a very good context to understand what would be possibly happening here during the tribulation events. If you are anywhere in the states that were affected by the New Madrid earthquakes, you should definitely look at this historically and study what happened. It was major, major destruction. There wasn't a lot of people living in this area at that time, but the few who were said it was definitely severe. They were shaken all over the place. It is incredible reading some of the first-hand accounts of it. It was awful. And so again, this gives us a preview of what will happen here again, even far worse, at the beginning of the tribulation. Not weeks, months, or years into the tribulation, apparently at the very beginning. Possibly the first day, because the Antichrist is coming out of the bottomless pit. And like Paul says, the Antichrist will be revealed before that day starts. He's going to be the first thing to happen at the tribulation, the bottomless pit being opened. Which apparently is when a volcano opens, which is probably related to that great earthquake as well too. So this gives us a preview. And again, the New Madrid earthquakes that happened historically were very close to each other. So also keep this in mind. When the Bible says there's going to be a great earthquake, there will also be great aftershocks as well. All these major earthquakes were separated by only a few weeks, with massive aftershocks in there as well too. So whatever we are planning ministry-wise, it not only has to survive the initial great earthquake, but it has to endure multiple dozens and dozens upon dozens of aftershocks that are probably going to be very strong as well too. Magnitude 5, 6, probably even close to 7 as well too, while the ground starts to settle and some of the fault stresses start to release. There's going to be massive aftershocks. So whatever ministry considerations you have planned, you have to figure out how is this going to last through multiple earthquakes for multiple weeks. So now it starts to get a little complex of we need to make something that's not going to be shut down on day one just by earthquakes. How do we do that? But this is also more challenging because the New Madrid earthquake fault zone is worse than the Western fault zones. Indeed, each of the Madrid earthquakes was comparable in strength to the devastating 1906 San Francisco earthquake, remembered as one of the worst natural disasters in U.S. history. Each of the 4 New Madrid earthquakes was that bad. Each of them, and there were 4 of them, almost back to back. Rather, the New Madrid seismic zone, which is a series of faults, lies within a continental plate. Consequently, because of differences in the underlying geology, each of the largest Madrid quakes dangerously shook a much larger area than, for example, the Alaskan and San Francisco quakes, 2 to 3 times and 10 times as large, respectively. Each of these earthquakes. The same can be said of the hundreds of aftershocks during the following decade, many of which were themselves respectable earthquakes, magnitude 5 through 6. So again, this gives us a very historic precedent of what we should expect and have to go through. Whatever ministry will have to go through this type of same thing. Earthquakes that affect 10 times as large an area as the largest earthquake that we know in modern history, the San Francisco earthquake. And there were 4 of them back to back. And then there were hundreds of aftershocks too. So how do you plan a ministry opportunity during that type of scenario? Now, for similar magnitude earthquakes, shaking area is about 10 times greater in the central and eastern United States. You know, most people are familiar with the earthquakes out west, but because of the geology, earthquakes in central and eastern U.S. are about 10 times greater, the reach and spread, the impact of them. So again, when you look at states where you are living now, potentially in America, consider that when this whole region starts ripping open with earthquakes and hundreds of aftershocks, what's that going to do in your area? With infrastructure, energy, and all that. What is it going to do there? With potential ministry opportunities you were thinking about. Earthquakes in the New Madrid seismic zone also differ in how the energy spreads or attenuates. In the western United States, seismic energy is absorbed by bedrock. In the central United States, though, seismic energy spreads further due to the loose soil in the Great Plains that are prone to liquefaction. Liquefaction is one of the inherent dangers in the New Madrid seismic zone. It occurs when a saturated or semi-saturated soil loses strength and stiffness due to stress. Earthquake shaking causes an increase in water pressure to the point where soil particles behave like a liquid. So again, note that there's major differences between central and eastern United States versus western. The impact of an earthquake here on the eastern side is a whole lot worse because of the geology, which is much more prone to liquefaction of the ground. And this is something you see sometimes in news, earthquakes in China, and the Christchurch earthquake in New Zealand is a great example where there's a lot of liquefaction of the ground. The ground just loses its solidity. And so when you look at a map of the liquefaction susceptibility map for the New Madrid seismic zone scenario event, you can start to contemplate where do you live if you live in this zone? What's the impact going to be on you in whatever ministry opportunities that you are thinking of leaving behind in your area? You know, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois. Multiple states affected. Of course, it spread even beyond these, but this closer zone, there's going to be a high impact, some areas very high impact for liquefaction of the ground. Places where entire buildings will just fall over because the ground essentially turns liquid. It loses its stiffness, and so many roads are going to be just become totally unusable. Bridges are going to be destroyed. There's going to be so much infrastructure in multiple states, all these areas, largely because of liquefaction. On top of the shaking, you know, this isn't shaking, this is liquefaction on top of the shaking that's going on too. So it is interesting. I was just doing some research and looking at this today and just seeing, I had researched before, and I think it's because of the mountains that come through this area, the Lookout Mountains, that attenuates a lot of the impact of the Madrid for our area here in central Alabama. But it's also interesting to see how the Brook Cherith ministry is in the county of Shelby, which even just historically and with the USGS modeling, they say there's no effect of liquefaction susceptibility in this area, in this whole county where we are right now. And the surrounding counties, it starts to be very low, even just based historically. So this is very interesting how the Lord is preparing a work here in central Alabama, in Shelby County, the Brook Cherith, that is in an area that would survive a major earthquake very well, even one known historically. Shaking-wise and even liquefaction, it would come through very well, far better than many of the surrounding counties and states as well too. Now again, for similar magnitude earthquakes, shaking area is about 10 times greater in the central and eastern United States. So when the tribulation starts and a great earthquake occurs, the new Madrid fault line most certainly will be released, all the different faults of that all at the same time. So the max effect of a major earthquake there, and the shaking will destroy so much infrastructure in surrounding states, so much just from this one fault line, which we know historically will cause catastrophic damage. And because of the historical nature, FEMA and other agencies, they've already done the calculations what would happen in modern times on the infrastructure if that same event happened again. In November 2008, FEMA warned that a serious earthquake in the New Madrid seismic zone could result in the highest economic losses due to a natural disaster in the United States, where potentially a 7.7 magnitude quake would cause damage to tens of thousands of structures, affecting water distribution, transportation systems, and other vital infrastructure. And this is also very important when you realize how many pipelines cross the Mississippi, how many bridges cross the Mississippi, how many important vital infrastructure, power, and energy flows right through this area, which will immediately be cut if an earthquake happens in this area. They already know it's going to cut off so much. In October 2009, FEMA funded a research considering a scenario where all three segments of the New Madrid fault ruptured simultaneously with a total earthquake magnitude of 7.7. The report found that there would be significant damage in 8 states studied: Alabama, Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Mississippi, Missouri, and Tennessee, with the possibility of additional damage in states farther from the New Madrid seismic zone. The report estimated 86,000 casualties, including 3,500 fatalities, 715,000 damaged buildings, and 7.2 million people displaced, with 2 million of those seeking shelter primarily due to the lack of utility services. So again, when we consider the prophetic implications of what the Bible does tell us when that day approaches, what's going to happen, we have to keep in mind that all this is going to be happening. Not just here in the New Madrid seismic zone, but across America, Europe, Canada, across the world. These same scenarios. Millions of people displaced. Water distribution affected, transportation systems disrupted, vital infrastructure destroyed. So much liquefaction going on in so many areas. So much infrastructure will be instantly irreparable, beyond repair, on top of World War III going on at the same time, adding further destruction. You know, a lot of people think, well, I'm out in the country, this area will be pretty safe. No. If you have a major earthquake and liquefaction out there with roads and bridges being destroyed through liquefaction and other things, what's the impact going to be on ministry potential in your area as well? Consider all this with what we see approaching, with what Scripture tells us will be happening. Millions of people displaced, mainly because of the lack of utility services. Suddenly without power, suddenly without water. All suddenly needing somewhere to go, with so many people injured, so many things to consider. And even FEMA and the USGS knows that the New Madrid fault system, it doesn't appear to be lessening its strength. It actually seems to be staying pretty tense still, because one concern is that the small earthquakes that still happen, they are not diminishing over time, as would be if they were aftershocks of the 1811 to 1812 events. Another concern is that the 4,500-year archaeological record of large earthquakes in the region is more significant than 10 years of direct strain measurement. In other words, they've observed over the past 10 years that the land doesn't appear to be moving or slipping that much. But on the other hand, the historical archaeological record tells us that yes, it does. And so when they look at the earthquakes that are going on now, still in the region, and that they're not diminishing, they know that the area is still under a lot of stress, which tells them that if it does slip again, it's going to be a major slip. It's going to be a major earthquake. The USGS issued a fact sheet in 2009 stating the estimate of a 7 to 10% chance of a new Madrid earthquake of magnitude comparable to the one of 1811 and 1812 quakes within the next 50 years. So about a 10% chance of it happening again within 50 years, but a 25 to 40% chance of a magnitude 6.0 earthquake in the same time frame. So they say, yeah, there's about a 10% chance that another major earthquake could happen, but there's also a very high chance, approaching 40%, that a slightly lesser major earthquake could happen a whole lot sooner too, because the area is still very much under stress. So again, these all come together with considerations that the Lord has been having me review here, and what He's been bringing to mind with the trailers, and just with whatever ministry opportunity we go forward in after the rehearsal of the book Cherith. It must be earthquake resilient. It must be earthquake resilient, because that is going to be the foremost thing on people's minds and interrupting their life right at the same time as World War III and all other sorts of events happening at the same time too. But what is going to disrupt every person's regular daily life is going to be the earthquake, disrupting so many utilities, which will also disrupt ministry planning and ministry opportunities that people have set aside for the tribulation too. So the Lord is giving wisdom of how we should approach this now that He's leading us to start the final Brook Cherith, the one that will go live. Now is where this really needs to be considered from the very start, which is amazing to see how He is giving wisdom and leading right at this time too. So it is all done right, so it will survive and be resilient to be a beacon of light during such an incredible, perplexing time.